of the youth, right? And how people can be just in general selfish or only thinking about themselves, you know. But there's evil on both sides, because then going back to Ed, you know, vengeance doesn't really work out for him. He resurrects Pumpkinhead and he immediately regrets it, because he's now tied with this demon, you know, once the resurrection and they do the blood pact, and he can see when somebody kills Pumpkin, or when Pumpkinhead kills somebody, whoever the marked ones are, Ed is able to see it through the perspective of Pumpkinhead. So he's living the brutality of killing these people, you know? And so that's what makes him have a change of heart, although it's too late, you know? So that's why in my write-up I said that it's pretty interesting that in the late 80s, the screenplay chooses to kind of, instead of glorifying revenge the way that, you know, I Spit on Your Grave or certain films like this that were very popular at the time, still very popular. You know, you have John Wick, you have Taken, things like this. Kind of romanticize the idea of revenge, and this one is awesome to me because it kind of shows you the endless, in of course in a fictitious way, but it shows you the end result of revenge is never, like, nobody's gonna win. You know what I mean? It's a vicious cycle of nothingness, you know? And I think that that was a very, you know, it's very brave, forward thinking of this film, and I enjoyed it a lot. My rating for this, I think, would be a solid 8 out of 10. I do have this kind of, how do you say, like a very fond connection with this film, because I remember being a kid, you know, in the 90s. I got cable kind of later in my I don't know, maybe when I was 10 I got cable for the first time, maybe a few years younger. And I just remember when Sci-Fi Channel was a lot, or I felt like when I was younger, the Sci-Fi Channel programming was a lot more rad, and they would actually play like horror and science fiction all the time. I remember them constantly playing Pumpkinhead, and probably Pumpkinhead 2, Blood Wings, but I remember specifically Pumpkinhead coming on, sometimes repeating itself, you know, a few times in blocks, and that's how I was able to see this kind of, for the most part, obscure film, you know, on TV. And for those of you who know, Sci-Fi kind of they will censor certain things, but gore usually is not one of them. They'll show everything you're supposed to, you know, see in the actual cut for the most part. But yes, I remember as a kid watching Pumpkinhead and having a crazy experience, you know, just watching how, you know, of course I was born in 89, you know, so I'm technically an 80s kid, but more of a 90s kid, so it's always fun to venture off into a new kind of, not new, but like an era that you weren't a part of, and see that kind of style, you know. And Pumpkinhead is fun, and visually it's pretty striking, especially the fact that you're able to see how Pumpkinhead is this huge entity, and they don't, with the cameras, they don't shy away with showing full body shots, you know. And so it's kind of impressive in that feat as well. I would say check it out. And if you guys are ready, I have a few Swan facts about Pumpkinhead. So the original title was actually Vengeance the Demon. Gypsy the dog is actually canine actor Mushroom, who you might remember from Gremlins as Barney the dog. Pretty rad. Mushroom was awesome. Even though I think that was the only 2 films that he was ever featured in. The teenage tourists in our story try to hide within a cabin for a portion of the film, and this cabin was actually used in the Jarvis house for Friday the 13th, the final chapter. It's also been used over the years in countless television programs such as Parks and Rec and a bunch of other stuff. And it was recreated in the Friday the 13th, the game, which is pretty rad. Lance Henriksen has admitted his dislike for all of the films except for the first one, and actually was unsure of shooting even the original until he read his scene where his dead son speaks to him asking, "What have you done, Daddy?" So to put in context, right after Ed Harley makes the pact and resurrects, Pumpkinhead, makes a pact with Haggis. He's driving back, and he can feel himself losing kind of his senses a bit. So he's kind of swivels off the road, off the dirt road, He has his son next to him, wrapped in a blanket, and he turns to his right, in the scene, and he sees his son has woken up from the dead, essentially. And his son looks at him, and he goes, "What have you done, Daddy?" And that this is a reference to like the blood pact, why would you do this in my name type of deal. And of course Ed Harley snaps out of it, and it becomes apparent that it was just a hallucination of his, but supposedly, going back to the Swan fact, that little tiny scene was what had Lance believe in the project and take on the role, because that made him that those few seconds scared him enough where he wanted to take on the project, and that's awesome. There's also been talks of Pumpkinhead revival for a few years. I think with one of the producers of the Saw franchise. But no updates have been given since about 2017. In my opinion, perhaps it's best that this property stay dormant in the pumpkin patch for now. I'm not sure a monster movie of this caliber would be really justifiable in today's climate. It makes sense for the 80s, even the 90s. I know the 2 sci-fi made-for-TV films came out in like 2006, 2007-ish. And even that's pushing it, and those didn't do well. I know Lance Henriksen he said that he was at a special theater program where he was supposed to do a Q&A for one of those made-for-TV Pumpkinhead releases, and actually he snuck out of the back because he didn't want to talk to the crowd after they had just watched it, which speaks volumes about how effective those sequels really are. So I'm not sure we need a reboot of something like Pumpkinhead. I just think in general, not even just in horror, but in Hollywood, in the film industry, I want to see more original content, original content. It can be done. And then in my final swan fact, at least for Pumpkinhead, this was actually the first role for the Big Bang Theory's Miam Bialik, which is that's pretty nuts. I didn't realize that this was her very first film. I know, of course, she's just a kid in it. I think she plays the one of the native kids that becomes a bigger character towards the conclusion. Bunt, she's his sister. They come from a big family, you know. They live in the hills, and she has like a little kind of cameo scene in the beginning at the Harley and Son grocery when they're making fun of one of the other kids, saying that Pumpkinhead's gonna get him, and you kind of get like this the urban legend of Pumpkinhead or the revenge demon within that little scene. And it's cool that that Miam was a part of that. And you know, like and like so many movie stars, her roots come from horror, you know, and that's a pretty cool thing, being a genre fan, knowing that. And yeah, so that wraps up my segment, my thoughts on the original Pumpkinhead, the only one that's worth diving into, in my opinion. Check it out if you haven't already. Coming up next, we're going to talk The Howling. Going back to the early 80s, which is the connection with these two. So, stay tuned.
Jimmy Joe, you done bad. Y'all know what settles on bad ones, don't you?
Pumpkinhead.
Pumpkinhead? Y'all stop. There ain't no Pumpkinhead.
What about old Mr. Foley?
He moved away.
Pumpkinhead got it.
Teared off his head and drank all the blood.
Did not.
Did too.
Shut up, Hesse.
Keep away from Pumpkinhead unless you're tired of living.
His enemies are mostly dead. He's mean and unforgiving.
Stop it!